To my presentation called Friend or Foe, or the Theory of Wow. The idea of the theory of wow is symbolized by the following statement. It is easier to pull a wet noodle than to push it. Thus, the UFO intelligence pulls us with curiosity, and we follow it down the path wherever it thinks we need to go. I learned from my friend Stanton Friedman, who had argued with every skeptic for 61 years of his UFO career, that you really can't convince skeptics of anything. Stanton didn't change any of the real heavy skeptics' minds. So this presentation is to look at what I call the theory of wow, how the intelligence behind the UFO phenomena changes the zeitgeist and changes the consciousness to make us see the world in a different way. The symbolic explanation of this would be a story where I always wonder what is really going on. You see the phenomena, and over the years I've realized there's something more complex going on than just what appears to be going on. One of the examples is people will often report that they wake up in the middle of the night and there's two beings, skinny, anorexic, scary looking beings standing beside the bed. And the question is, why would the aliens or ETs or whatever they supposedly are go poke, 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 wake up, wake up, wake up, and then wake the person up to scare the living daylights out of them when they see this scary looking alien there, and then immediately put them back to sleep again? One of the explanations is that the way you change attitude is through experience. Rather than the left brain analyzing things and coming to a solid conclusion based upon things of the past, experience will change you immediately. When you suddenly see these beings, everything changes. The person starts to talk, and the more people talk, the more people become aware that there may actually be aliens that wake you up in your bed, and that the world is not the random nuts and bolts place we think it is. MUFON conference theme is friend or foe. I don't like to get into the friend or foe thing. I believe everything is experience, but let's address quickly the idea that there are actually possibly evil aliens here to do some manner of damage. Call it the threat. Albert Einstein apparently talked to President Truman about 1952 overflight of Washington, D.C., where the president wanted to shoot the aliens down. And this is supposedly according to Frank Edwards, who was the biggest radio broadcaster of the 1950s, said that Einstein told him that he told the president, Mr. President, anyone that can come across millions of miles of space will know how to protect himself once he gets here. Don't start something you can't finish. There's a free survey of 4,200 experiencers, asking them about their experience with UFOs and entities. The people who answered the question produced the following statistics. 83% said if they had the chance to stop what was going on, they would not stop it, allow it to continue. Only 9% of people claimed that they believed that the UFO phenomena that they had encountered was evil. And most of those people were questioned again. And what it came down to is the reason they figured they were evil is that they were scared, nothing else. There's an interesting cartoon that sort of shows this, looking at things as to whether they're evil or not. There's a cartoon, and the one woman says to the other one, calm down, Edna. Yes, it's some giant, hideous insect, but it could be some giant, hideous insect in need of help. One of the other big clues to the theory of wow is the sightings from 1896, the year we discovered radioactivity. We had wooden ships flying around with propellers on them, sails, and lights. And this is before we had batteries. So how do you have lights on these things flying around? The idea then was quite clear that these were people from Mars, and they had flown from Mars through the vacuum of time and space on these wooden ships. We would now say that's absolute nonsense. There's no way that these were wooden ships from Mars. And we see it in a different light. And The more we look at the UFO phenomena, the more we realize it may not be what it appears to be. There's something in behind, more complex, that gives us a better idea of how reality actually works. The threat scenario has been put out that the government is lying. Blue Book conclusion was there was no threat. U.S. Air Force, no threat. NASA, no threat. White House said there was no threat. And people say they were lying. Perhaps they were actually telling the truth. Perhaps they made a conclusion and came to the conclusion, yes, UFOs exist and there is no threat. That's a good possibility. In August 2022, I and a couple of other Canadians met with American high-level witnesses to try to get them to provide answers to possibly 10 MPs, members of Parliament in Canada, who wanted to get answers to UFOs and that they might come forward. During that meeting, we were encouraged to do the threat scenario, get military witnesses, have congressional hearings, presented as a threat to national security. And everybody on the Canadian side that I'm aware of basically said, no, the idea is that the science advisor to the Prime Minister wants to do a scientific investigation. Simple, scientific investigation. At one point, one of the high-level Americans that was on the call said, that's the poison pill, I'm gone. The entire thing fell apart because the Canadians would not go with the threat narrative. And one of the people who was at that meeting talked about dirty footprints, that there could be a threat, that if you find muddy footprints in the living room behind a locked door, that would indicate there's a potential threat. Well, there is actually footprints that have been discovered in experiencers' houses. The problem is that the footprints are, as you can see from this one, a military boot print on a wall during a struggle, during a MILAB experience by a sheriff who was sheriff of two different counties, who had an experience, a MILAB experience. He was an experiencer. This is provided to me by Melinda Leslie, who is the expert on MILABs. And she said the only threat is the cover-up because it allows for stuff like that, which is demonstrated in this picture. So there may be muddy footprints behind locked doors, but they appear to be military rather than ET. Tucker Carlson asked Gary Nolan from Stanford University, who is very involved in analyzing experiencers and their injuries. He said, is there any evidence in the 100 plus cases that you looked at where human beings were harmed on purpose? And Gary immediately answered, no. Jacques Vallée said, not a threat. It is a spiritual system that acts on humans and uses humans. Another time he talked about the fact that, as I say, the military is using this to get funding. They mistook the phenomena for a threat, but everything in the defense establishment is oriented towards a threat. If you don't have a threat, you don't need all that weaponry. We're approaching it like a threat. Yes, and instead of the military looking at this, there should be a scientific investigation. Jim Semivan was a high-level CIA official who had an experience with beings in his room. He's the one that's behind the major disclosure that's going on right now in Washington. And he said, I don't think it's a threat at all, to be honest with you. I just think it's totally indifferent to who the hell we are. But nevertheless, it has to be looked at. And he's had the intelligence briefing on UFOs. He said, not a threat. He said it to Melinda Leslie 4 times. It's not a threat, Melinda. Bashar, the famous alien channeler, had an interesting experience with Linda Howe, who posed to him the threat question. Here's what Linda said. What is the greatest threat to us here on Earth? And Bashar said, you are. Linda said, me personally? She starts laughing. Bashar said, no, yourselves. The negative fear-based beliefs that you have all brought into that allow you to believe that there is such a thing as lack and believe that you can be attacked and not understand how you create your reality. Here's what George Knapp, reporter in Las Vegas, Nevada, was told when he talked to General Igor Maltsev, who was for 7 years the commander of the entire Soviet air defense system. He asked him about the threat, and Maltsev confirmed that he gave a standing order not to fire on the UFOs, that they had lost a number of planes, but if they left the UFOs alone, they were okay. George Knapp also stated this about the threat. There's a common characteristic. I think it has to do with attitude. Some of the worst things that have happened, and we have not made them public, happened when people are packing guns, commando types, secret agent types, gung-ho military veterans who come on there, he's talking about Skinwalker Ranch, on the defensive, and they're ready to take on whatever it is. These people seem to have the worst trouble. The present owner of Skinwalker Ranch, Brandon Fugel, said the same thing. He talked about this reflective nature, which I believe is an extremely important thing to realize about UFOs. I have noticed on a number of occasions, people who bring negativity to the ranch, that bring a spirit of contention or negativity, end up experiencing negativity. The ranch seems to be reflective, at least to respond in a very dynamic way to the spiritual or psychology of those who enter the ranch. This is Thomas Winterton, who came in with a very negative attitude when he first went to the ranch. And he said that it basically put him in his place. He was looking at this room and wondered, what's the big deal? We get into a bedroom, he said, on the southeast corner of the house. And I got in there and I started feeling really dizzy. And literally the room started to feel like it was spinning. It got so bad, I literally had to put my back against the wall and then slide down to along the wall to where I was sitting on the floor. And he said, wow. It basically just tuned him in and said, yeah, this is for real. Travis Taylor, the main scientist at Skinwalker Ranch, also had an experience where he didn't believe it. He went on there and he ended up getting radiation burns. And then suddenly he became a believer. And he talked about an experience that he had that would indicate this is not a threat. He said he was in his trailer and there was this booming voice and it said, you better go check the GoPro footage. So he got up and he went and checked the footage and there was this interesting UFO on the footage. Now, if it was a threat, why would they wake him up in the middle of the night and say, one of the cameras just picked us up, go and take a look at it? The other thing he talked about was this bizarre aspect of the wow thing, that the wow phenomena, the theory of wow, what they do is things that are so bizarre that they just are unbelievable. They cannot possibly be done in the real world. And he talked about these gamma rays that they had detected at Skinwalker Ranch. And Travis Taylor said, that does not happen anywhere except in atomic smashers, big particle colliders, and science fiction. And yet it happened at Skinwalker Ranch. And it did not leave the possibility it could be anything else. It just said, wow, this is unbelievable. This is not possible. And that's the kind of stuff that this phenomena seems to do when it displays its abilities. The idea of reflecting goes all over the place. The Bible says, as ye sow, so shall you reap. Seth, the first major channeler of the 20th century, said, you manifest everything around you. There is no other rule. Eddie Stone said, what goes around comes around. Bashar, the alien channeler, said, what you put out comes back. And then John Wheeler, who was the intellectual successor to Einstein at Princeton, said, in some strange sense, this is a participatory universe. It's a reflective. What you put out comes back. This is one of the books that used to be something that people were expected to sort of read. Michael Talbot, the book, The Holographic Universe. He talked about the phenomena. He's an experiencer. He was a client of Bud Hopkins. When he was very young, he had a lot of experiences with poltergeists. And he said, he thought, maybe I'm being demonically attacked. When I believed that, he said, it started to manifest even more as a demonic attack. But when I would sort of come to my senses and go, I know what this is, and I can see the emotional reason that this is manifesting this way, and then go, I'm ready to stop this, and I'm going to, have a positive frame of mind, all the negativity would stop. Michael Talbot said that when he had the poltergeist, when he was in a good mood, the poltergeist would hang socks off the plants in his room. When he was in a bad mood, he would wake up with needle marks and pin marks in his arm, needle marks and cuts in his arm. It's reflective. Thomas Winterton also stated there's this idea that they shouldn't dig at Skinwalker Ranch. And immediately the first thing he said is, let's dig. And he said, this is his quote, I will say that the more extensive digging I did, it seemed that without fail, and I mean without fail, something happened either to myself or to the equipment. Bud Hopkins, And John Mack had two different opinions. Bud saw it more as a negative experience, and John Mack saw it more as a spiritual seeking experience. They had an encounter in Boston in 1988. John Mack said, I guess I'd like to try to take the discussion out of the question of whether this is benign or malevolent. I don't really see it that way. And then he said one of the most important statements ever been made in ufology. He said, there's an irony here, Bud, in a way, because I'm supposed to be the psychiatrist here, right? I'm supposed to be the one that's seeing the real troubled, disturbed people. And it almost seems as if you're seeing the worst cases from the mental health standpoint, and I'm seeing these sort of seeking ones, which may have more to do with who we are and how we work and what goes on. It's this reflective nature to dealing with the phenomena. Now, there are injuries, as Maltsev indicated in Russia, that when you try to attack the UFOs, it's reflective. And this is a case, and I won't get into it, Bob Pratt, National Enquirer. This is the case that was picked up by US Navy intelligence out of Florida of a Cuban intercept of a UFO coming in. They ordered to identify itself and land. It didn't. And then the first plane locked on, and it was told, take it down. And as it went to fire, the wingman behind said, it's gone, it's gone. It was all picked up on tape in Florida by the US Navy intelligence. It's gone, it's gone, he's gone. The plane just evaporated. So if you attack the UFO, there is a chance that you will be injured. But if you leave it alone, you'll be okay. Now I want to go through the setup behind this, the theory of wow, how I sort of came to this. I call it shattering naive reality. We have a naive reality that's based upon perception. And what the phenomena is doing is it's saying, no, it's not that. It just does a very weird thing that makes you think, wow, what's going on? There's something must be wrong. And that's the whole point behind the paranormal phenomena. When you have a paranormal phenomena, it indicates to you clearly something you believe is wrong, or the phenomena doesn't exist. But if paranormal phenomena exists, something that we believe is not right. Otherwise, it would not be happening. We are led by curiosity. Max Planck tells the famous story. The Nobel Prize winner, father of quantum physics, tells the famous story. 1874, his professor Joly said to him, in this field, everything is already discovered, and all that remains to fill is a few unimportant holes. Don't go into physics, you're wasting your time. 1874, figured we had it all figured out. So when you have it all figured out, you don't need to research, but you don't need to do any research anymore. You've got it all figured out. But when you don't have it figured out, when something's not making sense, that's when you put in research money and you explore and discover new things. What the problem we're making, I say, is we're confusing perceptual and measured reality with fundamental reality. We can measure things, we can observe things, but that's not reality. Fundamental reality is much more basic, and we're describing things. We're not explaining things. It's almost like the Dead Sea. Moses goes, he does this, he does that. He opens the Red Sea and closes the Red Sea, and you tell the story and you say, that's a fantastic story, wonderful. Now, how do you do the trick? It's one thing to measure and to explain what's happening. It's another thing to explain or to describe what's happening. It's another to describe it. Science can measure, but it cannot explain reality. We've learned this through people like Donald Hoffman, who are now making these scientific arguments that all we are seeing is desktop icons, that we're not actually seeing reality, that reality is much more, it's like we're walking around with a 3D headset on, and the reality is deeper than what we're seeing. We're perceiving something, but there's something in behind it. We've made this mistake over and over and over again in history. We believed the world was flat because it had perceived to be flat. We thought the sun was going around the earth because it perceived to be going around the earth. 6 planets, we perceived there was only 6 planets. We perceived that matter was solid. And in 1920, only 100 years ago, we had a big argument between 2 major astronomers in the United States as to whether there was more than one galaxy. It appeared there was only one galaxy. And when the idea came up there was a second, that person was attacked for claiming there was more than one galaxy. We perceive things, and the more we go along, the more we realize we are making mistakes in perceiving things, and there's something else going on in the background. Prime example would be cells. We say there's 100 trillion atoms that assemble in a cell. They come in almost like the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes. We don't say how did they do this? How did they feed 5,000 people? We just say, shut up and calculate. that there's a trillion atoms come together and they go into the right three-dimensional spot at the right time, and within 24 hours they form spindles, and they form 3 billion base pairs that are exactly the same as the DNA of the cell that's creating it. And in 24 hours it has life, and it can now create another cell. That cell can create another cell. And we say, well, how do you do it? I mean, you're just describing how the cell is. You haven't explained how this thing. Where do the trillion cells come from? Where are the atoms? And basically, shut up and calculate. We sort of ignore that. The more you look into the greater reality of where this is happening, the more we discover, and the more we can create stuff and help the mankind. John Wheeler, who was the guy who came up with black hole and wormhole theory and the delayed choice experiment, and was at Princeton, said the universe does not exist out there independent of us. We are inescapably involved in bringing about that which appears to be happening. We are not only observers, we are participants. And that's this idea that there is a reality, and we are making up a reality based upon what we're seeing, and there's actually more complex reality behind it. This is a bad screen grab from the Philip Ghost. This is a simple experiment that was done in 1972 in Toronto, Canada, where they created a ghost. And they were able to actually create a ghost, and they were able to get it to move tables and stuff like that. So it was not a ghost. They had made it up. It was the people who were creating the ghost. They were the ones that were moving the table around. And that's the whole thing. If we can build something in the physical world, we can build it in the non-local world as well. And this is them around the table. And this experiment was actually reproduced again. They created a ghost, someone in Scotland, and in Australia, they did the same thing, where they created a ghost and was able to make this phenomena appear. So we are part of what is happening around us. We are not innocent victims of things around us. Rumi said, do not feel lonely. The entire universe is inside you. This is this idea that it's all within us and we are creating it. The Sufi expression says, you see yourself as a puny form when within you is enfolded the entire universe. And that may come down to the idea where aliens will always say, we've always been here. The one told me, we've always been here. You're the visitor. And this is the idea that there may not be an out there, as John Wheeler said. It may be all within us, and it's all one thing. And that's how they can move from one point in the universe to the next. They're actually just moving, and they're not moving anywhere. It's all in one spot. As John Wheeler even said at one point, he believed there was only one electron. Here's the basic concept is there's spirit. So Edgar Cayce 100 years ago, the famous sleeping prophet, said, the spirit is the life, the mind is the builder, almost like the Philip experiment, and the physical is the result. And then years later, John Wheeler comes and says almost basically the same thing. I do take 100% seriously the idea that the world is a figment of the imagination. That changes everything. If it's all imagined, if it's all, as Deepak Chopra would say, an activity inside consciousness, then anything is possible, and it's all here, it's all now, and it's all an activity inside consciousness. The shattering of reality is what the phenomena does. So we believe that things are solid, and then if you're Betty Andreasson and suddenly as she draws this, you see an alien coming through the wall, you have to rethink everything. Maybe everything isn't solid. Why is this happening? This should not be happening. If it is happening, we're missing a piece of the puzzle. And you get curious, and the more curious you get, the more money you put into research, and you work on it until you discover the answer. That's what they're trying to do. Get us curious and make us move down the road to explore and find out what we've got wrong. Rumi said, sell your cleverness, your idea that you've got it all figured out, and buy bewilderment. Cleverness is mere opinion. Bewilderment is intuition. To use that intuitive knowledge to get new material rather than relying on old ideas. Everything that's new, that's what I say, everything that's new that we discover, if we are honest, comes with the discovery that something we believed turned out to be wrong. Even Lou Elizondo is now talking about this kind of stuff. It's all connected. That's the name of my publishing company. I think it's fair to say there are principles in science now that are looking at such things as string theory, potentially, or holographic universe. And there's discussion in the scientific community about what consciousness really is. The theory of wow has moved us with these weird things that it does. It's moved us to look at things like holographic universe and wormhole theory and consciousness and these kind of things. We're moving ahead, but it's only because we've been made curious, and we have used that curiosity to do further research. One of the more important stories I've ever heard was Mike Cleland. Mike Cleland tells the story. He's the owl guy, and he talks about being in awe about what has happened to him. He was in a regression with Yvonne Smith out of Los Angeles. And he said, Yvonne, when I'm under, he said, ask me about the owls. Ask me why I have so many owl experiences. Ask me why I'm so obsessed with owls. So she asked him. And here's what he said. He starts almost like to channel. Instead of talking in whispers, he starts to speak very clearly. He said, the owl is not important. The owl is like a symbol or a sign on a door. It's just a sign on a door. It's what's behind the door that's important. The owl is meaningless to what's on the other side of the door. The owl is the right symbol for the door. There's a lot more. We are in a little tight hallway. On the other side of the door is this vastness. So what I would say is, like the owl, the UFO may just be a symbol. The UFO may just be a symbol that's on a door. And the idea that they're doing with the theory of wow is to get you to go and see the symbol on the door and say, what's this symbol doing on the door? What's the UFO about? What's the owl about? And then you see the door and you say, hey, I wonder what's on the other side of the door. And you open the door. That's what they're trying to do. They're moving you from symbol to door to symbol to door and getting you to open the doors. And when you open the door, then you realize there's this vast universe out there that has all sorts of different explanations as to what's actually going on. It's not the simple world on this side of the door that you thought it was. The owls are not important, and the UFOs may not be important either. The UFOs may just be symbols that are being presented to us to get us to wonder what's going on. People talk about skepticism, and I point out Descartes' skepticism. He talks about the fact that I must once and for all take seriously the idea to rid myself of all opinions which I formerly accepted. He had the idea that skepticism was not on new ideas. That's where we place it. Anything that's new, we have to be skeptical. He said exactly the opposite. It's not the new stuff you got to be skeptical of. It's all the crap that you have in your head that's probably wrong. As Mark Twain says, it's not the things you don't know that get you in trouble. It's the things you know that just ain't so. I suppose, therefore, that all things I see are illusions. I believe that nothing has ever existed of everything in my lying memory that my lying memory tells me. He started to doubt everything he'd ever believed. And that's what you need to do. You've got to question everything you believe and realize it's more complex. And that's when you can move on. As long as you accept that everything is true, you're going to be stuck. Heisenberg even talked about this idea of the physical world. The atoms, their elementary particles themselves, are not real. They form a world of potentialities or possibilities rather than of things or facts. So this whole idea that the physical world may not be what we think it is. There may not even be a physical world. And then when you start questioning things like that, then you can start to make a move ahead and understand what's going on in the paranormal world. As long as you believe everything is solid and it's all random, you're never going to believe in paranormal phenomena, and you're going to justify based on old beliefs and be skeptical. Jacques Vallée talked about this. We are looking at stuff through perception, the stuff on the screen in a movie theater. And he said, instead of looking at the screen, what I want to do is turn around and look the other way. When we look the other way, we see a little hole at the top of the wall with some light coming out. That's where I want to go. I want to steal the key to the projectionist booth. And then when everybody's gone home, I want to break in. We want to see what's actually projecting on the screen. We are looking at perception rather than what's actually behind the perception. Jane Roberts, the first channel in the 1960s, made this expression, which is now pretty well confirmed. And she said this idea that you manifest everything around you. There is no other rule. You create your own reality. Consciousness creates form. And those are the kind of things that in the UFO world used to be crazy stuff, and they're now being discussed. We have the idea of perceived reality. This is what I call perceived reality. We believe there's actually people inside the little radio, and Elvis is actually still alive and he's in the radio. And when we dig in, we realize, no, that's just perceived reality. There's something deeper, more intricate in behind the scenes. Margie, who writes about the guides talk about this idea that what you say is good and evil are human concepts. Everything is an experience. So you have this human concepts. Although they may seem evil to you, they were created and are loved by the Creator. However, you choose to think of this motive force. Yes, at times you must stand up to those who wish to do you harm as at last resort, but better look for a way to resolve your problems through the use of heart energy to send to the other and connect with them. Michael Talbot, again, we'd explained that already. And then the lucid dream research was done at Stanford by Stephen LaBerge. He talked about this idea of people seeing demons and angels inside the lucid dream experiment. And he was very clear, and people were taught that when you encounter an evil demon inside your experience, your lucid dream experience, you give them a big hug and a kiss, and it will turn into a positive being and give you a message. Your perception is what leads to what you see, and you can change it anytime you want. Now, here's the wow of sightings. Sightings, we spend a lot of time on sightings in the UFO community. So I'm going to go through why UFOs use sightings. And the main thing that's very clear is, why do UFOs have lights on? They have lights on them because they want you to see them. If they can fly around, they can abduct people, nobody sees them. If they don't want to be seen, they don't have to be seen. The reason you're seeing them is because they want you to see them. Started with me. Thing flew right in front of the car. 1975, May 1975. I fell off the edge of the earth. I could not believe it. The second night, it came right at me and then made a turn. And as it was flying back sort of where it came from, I wondered, what's it doing? Why is it in Carmen, Manitoba? And I started to wonder what's really going on. What was this thing doing? And that's what I'll ask people with UFO sightings. I'll say, you saw the UFO? Yeah. What was it doing? It wasn't doing anything. And that's usually the case. It's not doing anything. It's just there. Do you think it wanted you to see it? And people will say, yeah, I think it wanted me to see it. And this is the whole thing. It just wants you to see it. It wants to shatter your reality. It wants you to make you wonder what the heck's going on. The second night it came at me, it was bouncing around like a ping pong ball in the sky. The little kids described this. They'd seen it as well. They called it the bouncing ping pong ball. Why was it bouncing around in the sky? Because they wanted you to go like, what is it doing? Does it in order to come from another planet, does it need to bounce around like a ping pong ball? No, it's showing off. It's going, watch this. And it's just like defying 8 inches in the field of vision, just jumping around the sky. It wasn't doing anything. It was just showing off. And then the object changed. When it came, it was the ping pong ball. And then when it finally got to us, it was this red plasma object that I had seen the first night. So why did the object change? And if objects can change, then what good is UFO sightings? UFO sightings will tell you something weird is going on. But in terms, if the object is able to morph and it was able to change shape and size and color as it's moving through the sky, the idea that we're going to get some sort of common object that's going to tell us something is not going to happen, because it can change whatever we want. I had 2 encounters. I had the triangle sighting in 1976, where it started as a big arc welding light, and when it came over the car, it was this huge triangle with 3 lights, nothing flashing, no arc welding light, nothing. Objects can change. Then you've got to start to wonder, is it really an object? What are you really looking at? This is the one that got me going. Again, it was theory of wow. It was like, wow. It was 1975. A camera crew was there from a local TV studio. This is the second part. There's actually, the video is actually on the internet. They caught this thing jumping from the ground to 5,000 feet in the air. It's the Nimitz story. 80,000 feet down to sea level in 7/8 of a second. This went from ground level to 5,000 feet in the air in 1/8 of a second, and they got it on film. So this thing jumps in the air. So why is it jumping in the air? It's showing off. And then it went across the sky. And when I talked to the reporter who had filmed it before they cut the film apart, because there's only 2 little segments that showed up, he said, I saw the film before it was edited and it was backwards. I said, what do you mean? I said, I know what you're thinking. I'm telling you, the film was backwards. It went across the sky and then jumped in the air. And it's that kind of wow stuff. That's why I went out. When this film became public in my city, I said, wow, we got to go see what this thing is. And I got dragged into this phenomenon. 1890s, you have this, which is classic nonsense. There's a wooden ship, and they talk to the beings that are flying it, and they say, where are you from? And they say, we're from Mars. Now, in 1890, that was what people believed. So they believed, yeah, this is a wooden ship that came flying through outer space from Mars, because at that time they had discovered the canals on Mars, and they believed these are Martians. And the whole thing was, do we believe that now? Absolutely not. So what were these people actually looking at? And these were thousands of sightings in the United States and in Europe, and multiple witness sightings. These people were seeing this stuff, but why was it appearing as a wooden ship? Was it actually a wooden ship? Of course, because people were describing this, and it had big lights on it. So the question is, what are we really looking at? Is that what really a UFO looks like, or is it just projecting something to the people based upon their understanding of how the world works? And as we move along, the UFOs are going to keep changing, as you will see actually happen in history. The 1897 UFO crash is totally bizarre. When you actually read the accounts of this thing, where it crashes, it runs into a windmill and crashes, and the pilot dies, and there's crash wreckage all over the place. The thing was moving 8 to 10 miles an hour. Well, today, nobody would ever believe that a craft coming across the galaxy at 8 miles an hour would hit a windmill and fall apart into little pieces. That's the story, but that was the story for the time. Now we would never believe that. So these bizarre stories, the theory of wow, it's these weird things that don't make any sense that make you explore and look further into what's going on. And that's when you make your discoveries. We talk about the threat now of UFOs coming close to planes. 1942, 3, 4, 5. My father was an Air Force guy. They reported UFOs on the edges of planes, Foo Fighters. And then as soon as the war ended, the Foo Fighters went away. So where did the Foo Fighters go? Where did the wooden ships go? They all disappeared to the Foo Fighters. And the question is, what was the Foo Fighter? I mean, why was it there? What was it actually doing? 1946, the ghost rockets started. And most people don't really realize the ghost rockets was like a Swedish phenomenon. And most people don't realize that these things went on. They went 1946, 47, they just kept going. And they've had hundreds of reports since. And every single time it's the same thing. It looks like a rocket going across the sky, and it crashes into a swamp. It's a completely different story. It's the UFO phenomena, and they say they have no abductions. So they have this bizarre thing. So what is it doing there? I mean, if there's UFOs, why are they crashing into swamps in Sweden? They're just doing this weird thing to get people to explore further, to explore the nature of reality. 1947, Kenneth Arnold, first UFO sighting. People don't realize this. He didn't see a flying saucer. He saw a crescent-shaped object, but they wrote it up in the paper as him seeing like saucers skipping across water. And that's when the idea of flying saucer came. And immediately, everybody stopped seeing crescent-shaped objects, and everybody started to see flying saucers, even though there was no flying saucers. There were crescents. And that's the whole thing. Are we part of what we're seeing? Did the UFOs actually change based upon people's perception from crescents to flying saucers? And we have this idea where we suddenly the flying saucer comes along, and then you have this idea with the bubble helmets, which I'll explain in a minute, with the aliens, where you can clearly see the influence of people's belief system on what kind of beings and things they're seeing. As soon as the green fireballs go and the flying saucers start, then you get the green fireballs. And the green fireballs all appear over the nuclear stuff in the southwestern United States and the western United States. And these green fireballs, and then they go away. So where'd the green fireballs go? And it's like, well, maybe they're on another planet 100 years less advanced than we are. And as soon as the Foo Fighters leave, they're going to send the green fireballs. And they do this on planet after planet after planet. They send in first the wooden ships, then they send in the Foo Fighters, then they send in the green fireballs. And this is the process they're going through as they educate the world or raise consciousness. The Adamski crafts. In 1952, you started to get the ones with the bells underneath them, the balls, and they called them sometimes the bells. And you have the Adamski crafts came up. They changed from the flying saucers to the Adamski crafts. And then in 1975, when I had my triangle sighting, that's the first triangle sighting I'd heard of. And now triangles are all over the place, but they weren't when I started. I'd never heard of a triangle until I saw mine in about April of 1976. Now you get them; they're on news all the time. And then you get sightings like this, which is a very important story. And this is the idea of Bud Hopkins. How did Bud Hopkins get involved? Bud Hopkins got involved in 1975, the same as I did. He got dragged into the rabbit hole. 1975 was when Linda Howe got dragged down the rabbit hole. 1975 was when Stephen Greer had his first CE5 experience where they used CE5. 1975 was when Travis Walton was abducted. 1975 was a big year. Bud got dragged in, but he had two previous experiences. Most people don't realize he was involved in War of the Worlds. and I won't get into that story. He was actually involved in War of the Worlds, the invasion of New Jersey by Martians in New Jersey. He was a little 7-year-old kid while this was going on. 1964, he has a sighting with 2 other people. He's driving near the Cape, and this UFO during the day suddenly is hovering over top of the car, and it's just sitting there. And it's the old thing. What's it doing? It's not doing anything. It's just sitting there. It's going, "Hi, bud. Can you see us, bud? Take a good look, bud." And he becomes obsessed. And he drives the next day, and he tries to figure out how long was he driving, how long was this thing there, and he becomes sort of obsessed with this whole thing. And then in 1975, they do the absolute classic theory of wow, where he's talking to the guy who's running the liquor store down at the corner, and the guy says, "Hey, bud," he says, "I had this sighting. It's weird, and this UFO came up over the car, and it flew along, and it landed in this park, and the door opened up, and these like about 10 aliens came out, and these all wearing the same suit, and they had a little shovel type thing and a bag, and they all grabbed a scoop of dirt and put it in the bag, and they all went like little machines back into the craft. The door closed, and the thing flew away. It all happened in 4 minutes." And Bud went, "What?" And it's like, really? Like little aliens came out with shovels? They came across 1,000 light years or 1,000,000 light years away with a little shovel to get a piece of dirt in New Jersey, in a New Jersey park. And so Bud went, and he went to the park, and he found the 10 little holes, and he was obsessed. After that, he started down the rabbit hole and helped to start raise consciousness. But he got dragged in by becoming very curious as to what was actually going on. This is the Nimitz thing, the classic Nimitz thing. Why would the Nimitz go from 80,000 feet down to sea level in 7/8 of a second? Like, what did the guy, like suddenly realize that he'd run out of gas or something? This is absurd. This is just, hey, watch this. The same as when they went to chase them, they'd been there for a week. There was no threat. They were sitting there for a week. And then finally, when they decided to go chase them, as far as I'm concerned, the head guy said, "Hey, Zogar, go over there and make some big bubbles in the water. They're coming. The jets are coming." And he goes and makes these big bubbles. And they went, "Holy cow, we're flying over, and these bubbles are in the water." And the thing dropped down, and it was flying into the wind, and it was all this kind of stuff. And they're all thing. And still 20 years later, it's just a anecdotal UFO sighting. And people are still talking about it. We're talking it over and over because it had these weird things. If it was just a UFO that had been flying along, you never would have heard of the Nimitz. It was these weird things that made the story get repeated over and over and over again. And that's what they're doing. They're doing very weird things to try to get your attention and get you to repeat the story. Now they've changed the things. So we've gone flying saucers, green fireballs, Foo Fighters, wooden ships, and now we got little cubes inside circles, and they're coming as close to the plane as possible. Why would they come so close to the plane? I'm pretty sure they said, "Hey, I bet you I can get closer to the plane you can," because that's what they want you to do. They want to say, "Man, that thing came within 1 inch of the plane," and get people to tell the story. They want it to be spectacular. It's like a movie. If the movie is not spectacular, everybody gets up with their popcorn and walks out and goes in the next movie theater. They want it to be as bizarre and as wild as possible to get you dragged down the rabbit hole. Even the wow of entities. If you take a look at the story of entities, you'll see the same thing. It's this progression of entities that keeps changing and has influence upon what we believe. From 1947 to 1961, the Greys appear in 1961. Before 1961, there was no Greys. And before then, what have you got? You've got science fiction from the 1940s and 1950s. Here you have wearing dark diver suits with round, shiny helmets. Helmets with oval faceplates. A hose from the helmet down to the mask. And one-piece suit, metallic suit with round glass-like helmets. White helmets. Handsome men. Translucent helmets. A man of average height with helmet, wore shiny helmets. When was the last time you heard of an alien with a helmet? 1940s and 1950s, they're all over the place. And that's the whole thing. We are part, as John Wheeler said, it's a participatory universe. We are part of what we're observing. I had these beings that were called chons, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. They don't have any faces. They don't want anything. They're just beings. They call themselves the beings. And 2 of them, they wanted me to interview them. So of course, when I went in, I do the interview with them. First question I ask is, I said, "Hey, are you actually an alien? Are you actually an ET?" And they said, "Would you like us to be an ET? We could be an ET if you want us to be an ET. But no, we've always been here. You're the visitor." Sherry Wild, there's numerous people I've asked, ask him if he's an alien. And Sherry Wild had the experience. Da, who was the being she was dealing with, told her he was from some star system or whatever, and he's a Grey. And when he went to the publisher, the publisher said, something's wrong. He's got to be from Zeta Reticuli. He tells you he's from this other place, but he's got to be from Zeta Reticuli. Something's wrong. Ask him what's going on. So next time she sees Dot, she said, hey, what's going on? Are you actually an alien? Like what are you talking? What's going on here? And he said, that would not best describe the truth of who I am. And she said, okay, so then where are you from? And he said, I'm a voyager of the universe going where needed and in service to the creator. And basically said, no, I'm an entity. And this is the whole deal. When you confront them, and I've had a number of people that confront the alien and say, are you actually an alien? And they'll actually say, well, no, not really. Or you wouldn't understand. And then you see the beings, how they change. So you have the beings on the left. This is an actual photograph that Joe Burks provided for me from one of his team leader people, which may actually be a real photograph of a gray. And then you have the Mission Rama people. So you have the grays, which are seen now very commonly. But if you go to the Mission Rama, there's 25,000 of these people. What you basically see is that there's no grays, there's no reptilians, there's no mantids. John Mack said, some experiencers believe that the form that the humanoid being appears may depend upon their own level of consciousness, as on the initiatives of the various species out there, or alien agendas that are independent of the mind of the experiencers. Reptilian beings might just appear to be those wrestling with dark inner forces. Be like grays could come to the psychics of people who are not ready to accept their reality. Luminous beings to enlighten folks, and so on. So John Mack actually looked at this, that the being you see is dependent upon what's in your mind. Sure, Barbara Streisand's stepson is an experiencer. He told me that he was told by the beings that when we come into your world, we go into your head and we find out what's in your head, and it is what is in your head that we use to teach you a lesson. We have no other choice. So you are part of what you're actually seeing. 1950s. What do we have in aliens? 1950s. Look, these are the aliens from 1950s. They're like wearing suits, and they're, wonderful looking guys, and very friendly, and taking people for rides on flying saucers and everything. Oh, they all made it up. They didn't make it up. This is part of the deal. And then in 1961, suddenly there's a gray scene, and the whole thing shifts, and we move to grays. It's not that in 1961 everybody started telling the truth. People were describing what they were seeing, and it was influenced by what their belief system was. This is a classic. An alien comes, a trillion galaxies away, and comes down and asks some guy for a pail of water. I mean, it's like, come on, it's very simple that he wants him to tell the story. He wants this engagement. He wants this story out, and he really doesn't need a pail of water. This is my friend, UC Ronan, who's an experiencer out of Israel. He had the beings. His beings were green beings, and he saw them in Los Angeles in the early 1980s. And he was told this, which I think is pretty classic as to what may be going on. The being said, the way you see us is defined by you. When we visit your world, we temporarily have a physical body defined in a certain way, but it is not the only form or our original essence. In our dimension, there is no need for a physical body defined in a particular way as in yours. You share the definitions of reality that are given to you, but you are not yet aware of it. Kid Green, who's gotten more probably UFO briefings than anybody, ran the weird desk at the CIA for a number of years, was a control officer for the remote viewing program, said if a witness was inclined to believe in extraterrestrials, then that is what he or she would see or would experience. In reality, the witnesses were actually viewing was nothing like the different interpretations that existed in each of their minds. And again, it can appear different to each witness present at the same event. I have seen that. I've got it on film of people inside a Zendra face to face with a being, and they were all describing different experiences. This is Adama. This is one of the more interesting stories you may not have heard about. This is from the mission Rama. There's 30 some beings, all from the planet Apu and from Ganymede, the moon of Jupiter, which would be like hundreds of degrees below zero, but this is where they claim they're coming from. And Adama gives an indication he wants people to meet at Mount Shasta in 2020. I wasn't able to go, but I know people who were there, and I got to interview people who were part of one of the most bizarre stories of all times. Now, people say they question entity experiences, or they've got an impression of how the entity experiences. I had the one from 2014 at Mount Shasta. I interviewed all the people. There was 7 people who all saw the same being inside what they call a Zendra, which is like a portal type thing. All these people have them on camera. They're describing what they're seeing, 10-foot being, beautiful hair, because it's not an evil alien. The evil aliens have no hair, and the good aliens, all they have nice hair, and they're like, they all describe them as Phelps, Michael Phelps, the swimmer, all muscular. And Adama is showing up here in 2020, but in 2014 it was Antarel. In 2015 was Antarel again. There was 8 people in the Zendra, all looking at this being. And the one was a 24-year Navy veteran who was then gone into the professions after that. And he told me, I said, did you see everybody said it was like Antarel, it was like a hologram that night. And he said, it wasn't a hologram. And I said, well, everybody described him as a hologram. He said, he wasn't a hologram. He said, I was close enough, I could see the lines in his face. It was as real could be. I could not believe it. He'd never seen a UFO. He'd never seen anything. And then this phenomena followed him home. So we had the 8 in 2015, but in 2020, there was 9 witnesses. So how many people have an entity encounter with 9 witnesses? And I got 3 of them on camera. So let me tell you a little bit about the story. These are the 3 witnesses. They're all Latinos. Most of the Mission Rama people are, they were told to come there. And Adama wanted 111 people there. I think they had about 40 there. And this girl on the left is from Mexico City. And they basically tell the story that they're there at 2 o'clock in the morning on what's called the Sand Flats at Mount Shasta. And suddenly this girl gets the impression that they're here. And the others say, "What? How do you know they're here?" "I know they're here." And they said, look, there's a light on the edge of the forest. And they said, "No, that's just probably a camp light. Somebody's camping or whatever." "No, that's them. They want us to come there. They want us to go across the field and come to them." And then the other people said, "It's pitch dark. It's like 2 o'clock in the morning. There's all these potholes. We can't go across. Somebody's going to get injured going across the field." And then they said, "Okay." They said they're going to come to us. And suddenly these 9 people were levitated into the air. Keep in mind, we got these people on record describing this event. 9 people levitated into the air, and they started to they were so scared, they all held hands and they started to ohm. They didn't know what else to do, and they could hear these beings coming across, and it sounded like elephants stampeding across this field. And they started to ohm because they didn't know what to do. And the beings appeared, and they were Adama was there, and these other beings. And I actually asked them, and here I think we've got a video where they sort of describe how many beings they were, and the beings started to ohm as well. And after the event, we asked them, how long did the event take place? And they all maintained the same thing. They said, we have no idea how long the event took place. We have no idea. And that when they went to the tents after, the beings were still walking around the tents, and they could hear them walking around. And some of these people were so petrified, they basically got to their campsite and left. They were so floored by what had happened. 9 witnesses, all describing the same story, and we have 3 of them on camera. So I think here we have where they talk about how many beings there was.
So they were as tall as pine trees, and they were luminous, like the light that you would see when you're